Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Level Up webinar. I'm Michaela, joined by Marissa, and we are very excited to be continuing this series today, talking about all things cybersecurity and compliance. If you're new to this series, we host one webinar per month designed around a different topic each time for business leaders to strategically level up their business game. So we'll be talking about building tech into your normal business operations, and we also have an expert guest joining us today to share their knowledge on regulatory compliance to help level up your business game even more. But before we get started today, I do want to mention a couple of quick tools and then we'll kick it off. So these are pre-recorded conversations. However, we are here live with you in the chat box. So please feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar so that we can address them and get you some answers. And one last thing before we get going, this webinar will be available as a recording after the fact, so you'll get a link in your inbox with the recording that you're absolutely welcome to share with other people inside your office or your network that you feel would benefit from the content. So today we're going to be focusing on the topic of cybersecurity and compliance, and we're in a time where there's many different compliance regulations to abide by, and more data than ever is being created and stored. So it's important to make sure that your business is equipped with the right tools and knowledge to navigate through all of those requirements. So with all of that being said, let's get started.
Let's level up.
All right, so we have Rhett here with us today from Creo to share his expertise when it comes to all things compliance and cybersecurity. But before we get started, Rhett, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give us a little insight into what you do at Creo.
Sure, happy to do that. So I'm Rhett Somerville. I lead our cybersecurity and compliance practice at Creo. I've been with Creo for about 4 years. We're a management consulting firm in the Triangle area, North Carolina, and I've worked pretty much all my career in cybersecurity and compliance, both at large companies, so large financial services, technology companies, as well as smaller startups. So very familiar with sort of the small to medium size businesses and some of the challenges they face when it comes to compliance and security.
Cool. Thank you again for joining us. I'm excited to learn a lot, so let's jump right into things. So let's start more like broad scale. There are many different compliance laws out there. What are some of the most common ones that you see affecting small businesses?
Yeah, there are a lot. There's really an alphabet soup of various regulations out there. Some of the ones that are top of mind for most folks would be GDPR. Now, this is a European data privacy standard, but it doesn't end at the European borders, and it does affect a lot of our clients in the U.S. as well, if they have any data from any European residents. Some others that a lot of our clients deal with would be with HIPAA, for example, in the healthcare space. For companies that are doing business with government agencies, there's other regulations such as FISMA, and there's some CCMA is another new regulation that's come out if you're a DoD contractor. And then another one for data privacy in California is very popular now, the CCPA. That is applies to protect the privacy of consumers, which affects some of our clients as well.
You mentioned that those should be top of mind for businesses. And does today's work environment, why should that be top of mind, with the ever-changing regulations and requirements?
Yeah, well, the fact of the matter is that the number of regulations isn't reducing; it's only increasing. The expectations of companies when it comes to data privacy, security is only growing, that's largely because of the data explosion that we're seeing. The exponential increase of data that just exists out there, and a lot of that is sensitive. So it's something that you want to be. It needs to be top of mind because you need to take a strategic approach at how you handle compliance. There are too many regulations out there to just take them and try to tackle them one at a time. It's a very costly way to do that. So you need to have a strategic approach where you're aware of, okay, what are all the regulations that really apply to my business? And then try to identify those one-to-many relationships. So if you do something right, you implement a control, it will address, these various regulations. And so we help clients really identify those relationships so they're getting, the biggest bang for the buck of their investment in security.
Right, and you've mentioned data privacy a couple of times because obviously personal information or sensitive information is important to protect, whether it's from like an IT compliance or an IT security perspective. So let's talk a little bit about data governance and data privacy and data protection. What roles does those concepts play in compliance and regulation?
Yeah, so there's a lot of relationships there, and data governance really is a way to help achieve those requirements of the regulations, and do that in a way that's efficient. And so data governance, you can think of that most broadly, is going to include all of the processes, technologies, roles, policies around data, and to ensure that data is being managed appropriately, and if it's sensitive data, that's being protected. For example, a common policy that we really emphasize is one around least privilege. So especially when it comes to sensitive data, that people have access to the sensitive data they need to do their job, but if they don't need access to that data, then they shouldn't have access. So data governance is really important. Data classification is another part of it. I would say a subset of that umbrella of data governance, and data classification really starts to help you look at your data as an asset. And you don't. A good analogy is an accountant. In accounting, you have a balance sheet. The balance sheet has these different asset categories: cash, inventory, accounts receivable, etc. All of those are different assets, or charter of accounts. I think it's been a while since I took accounting, but that's the terminology, right? So we want to help clients think about their data assets in the same way. Some of those data assets are going to be really important, like, for example, your cash account, that might be something that you really want to keep a close eye on. Similar to data, that might be protected health information. So PHI could be PII. And so there could be other data like, where is the company going to go for their next picnic? Okay, that's not as important, right? So understanding your data and looking at it from an asset perspective is really important to start to zero in on, okay, what's our most high value data that we need to really make sure that we're protecting from security standpoint, privacy. So that data classification, that way of thinking is another really important component to efficiently meeting these requirements.
It makes sense because in order to protect the data, you need to be able to know what data exists and to be able to have a common understanding of how sensitive that data is. But it also seems like it would be important to know that so that you can have those measures in place to preserve data, or even, I know data retention can be part of compliance, that, you can only hold data for so long, or I believe it's under GDPR where it has to be, they have the right to be forgotten. So being able to track that data is important. It's all great advice. So I'm going to ask you for your official advice. What do you have to offer to businesses in terms of staying on top of regulatory changes? What kind of steps can they take to handle it?
Yeah. I think that just to pick up on the last comment that you made around the data, and retention is a topic that's important. But think about it. We in security world, we like to think of it security as a combination of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So that's the CIA triad that we refer to. And so you do want to look at data from all three of those perspectives. It's really important. As far as what we recommend for clients typically is that they do, when it comes to compliance in particular, that they have that they take that strategic approach. And so that is, you start out, we recommend starting off by really getting an understanding of what regulations do you need to comply with. And so we will help with that sort of conduct that type of an assessment. And then we identify those one-to-many relationships I talked about. So what are the common requirements across HIPAA, GDPR, CCPA, et cetera, that apply to your business? And let's make sure we're focusing on those first and addressing those and implementing controls so that you're good. And then with privacy, you have to plan for the worst, that you might have a breach, and you need to have a way to respond to that in a quick manner. And that is not just like a cybersecurity attack. That's not something you want to try to figure out in the moment. You want to have a game plan, and preferably that you've actually tested on that before you're actually dealing with that. So the same goes with a breach notification that's required for all of these privacy laws.
Right, because compliance isn't just about protecting the data, but it's also about being able to, I lost the word there, but
preserve your reputation.
Yes, and protect the organization. So it seems like it would be reasonable to have a response plan as part of that. Right. Is that something that Creo offers?
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, we offer services in this area to, like I said, putting together a compliance strategy and a plan, but then also providing that guidance on how you put together an incident response plan, and making sure that who's going to be authorized to talk to the media, for example. What are and this typically involves multiple stakeholders, within the company. And make sure that we help train those folks. Okay, this is what your role is going to be in incident response. So we all do that. Put a plan together, and then train on it. So we do tabletop exercises where we create a scenario that's very real life, and we assign roles to stakeholders around the table, and we run through a drill of like, okay, this just happened. How are you going to respond? And that starts to develop that muscle memory, so that when they actually are under a real situation, they're a little bit better prepared.
I'm going to switch gears just a little bit because we kind of been talking broadly, but we do work with several growing life sciences companies, and know from experience that their compliance requirements do impact their IT strategy. So when should these life sciences companies start thinking about GXP or quality management systems?
Yeah. Good question. So we work with a lot of clients in the life sciences space as well. They're doing clinical research, and that's a highly regulated area, FDA regulated, and you really can't get too far down the path of clinical research without ensuring that you're meeting those requirements. And because we work with those types of companies, we're able to get efficiencies on both cybersecurity and compliance, data privacy compliance, but also quality compliance, because there is overlap, and there's certain controls that are required, that the FDA requires, that are also required in these other regulations. So having that awareness, that visibility, and making those connections is important. So it's something that any company in life sciences doing clinical research, that they're going to want to be thinking about that from the very, very beginning. And we help with just specifically on the data, on the quality side of things, is we help with clients do a lot of computer system validation of systems that need to be validated. Also QA, the quality assurance process is very regulated and controlled. We do work around data integrity as well for those types of companies.
Now, one last question about kind of specifics or specific laws. Businesses or professional services companies that work with healthcare or medical companies' offices, what are the penalties? I mean, are there penalties for them with HIPAA? Are they bound to be compliant?
Yeah. Well, so HIPAA is going to focus more on any protected health information. So these would be patient data typically. So that's what HIPAA is mostly concerned about. And there are definitely pretty significant fines, as there are with GDPR as well. And the HIPAA fines have really been ratcheting up. So I would say in the first 20 years of HIPAA, it was just a slap on the wrist, really. And they're really increasing recently. So that's something that's really important. When it comes to the FDA side of things, this could be a matter of survival for the business, because if you're violating, if you're violating a requirement for FDA, and there is a process where there's going to be findings and there's a way to remediate that. But if you are not making a very good effort, strong effort to comply with FDA, then you will be shut down. You will not be able to do the work that you need to do to keep stay in business. So, that's probably the more important penalty, I guess, of not complying on that side. It's really just not an option.
Right. That makes sense.
Definitely. You mentioned some too, kind of your process over at Creo and how you guys help businesses get that process started when it comes to navigating compliance. What are some of the benefits to using an outsourced provider such as you guys to help them work through all those things?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. I mean, first one is that this is it's not easy work. It's not light. It's not. It does take some effort, and if you are if you have the expertise in house and they have the bandwidth, then great. You don't need a third party. But if you don't have someone that has the knowledge and then the availability to really focus in on this, then that's where a third party provider comes into play. And we have on my team we have experts that live and breathe this, and we work with clients all the time, and so we're able to take a pretty efficient approach. We have a methodology that we follow, and able to turn things around much more quickly than most of our clients. That's why they reach out to us.
Yeah, we definitely. We've had clients come to us as a managed IT service provider. There are plenty of things that we can offer in terms of strategic IT security, infrastructure pieces, end user support. But when it comes to compliance, we always recommend a partner like you guys because you are the experts, and there is that value to having somebody who helps with the IT security side and then a separate entity to help manage compliance, some checks and balances. So. Yeah,
absolutely right, Marissa. That applies in security as well as compliance. It's having that outside perspective to give you to look at the business, and a lot of times that's very helpful, and that applies, like I said, especially with security, because a lot of times you've got really smart people building, developing in-house, and sometimes they can be very close to the system, the processes, et cetera, and miss something that an outside perspective would catch.
Speaking of finding things, one of the things that we have sent your way would be penetration testing. And I'd love for you to kind of be able to share that offer with our attendees?
Sure. Yeah, we've started working with WorkSmart on penetration testing, vulnerability scans, and we find this is a really good starting point to understanding what the security posture is of an organization. We do quite a bit more than just that, but like I said, it's a good starting point, and it is a requirement and an expectation for almost every compliance regulation that we have been talking about today. And we have a few different flavors of that. A penetration test, we can do it externally. So take the same approach and use the same tools that a hacker would use. We do internal penetration tests, so that would be looking more at the internal threats. Folks that disgruntled employees or someone are able to install a Raspberry Pi machine in your network port. What damage could they do? And then we also do social engineering as well, which my team really loves, and that's where they'll actually go on site and put on a costume and try to talk their way into the network closet. And
Wow,
I found myself a new job.
I know, seriously.
Yeah, it's a favorite of the team, and we have a pretty good success record, which is a little scary, but. And then we also do we do vulnerability scans. That's a little higher level, not quite full pen test. We'll do those vulnerability scans, and those are often a quarterly expectation. And so we do all flavors of those.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I believe that is all we have for you today. Thank you for sharing all of your expertise with us. If anyone watching would like more information, we will provide the link to Creo's website. You can check it out and see what all they have to offer. And with that, we will see you next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
So we've talked a lot about regulatory compliance and why it's important to make sure that your business stays compliant with all the different requirements. Now we're going to focus on steps that you can take to protect your IT systems and the data that lives within them. So let's start by addressing legacy infrastructure. For example, if you have any old laptops running Windows 7, it's time to come up with a plan to upgrade those.
Yeah, that's right. If it's no longer supported by the vendor and security vulnerabilities aren't being addressed, it can be a way in for an attack. The ideal solution is to upgrade it. Before it can be decommissioned or replaced, meaning like if you can't get rid of it right away, make sure you cut the internet to it and don't let it communicate with other machines on the network or other parts of your environment. Because remember, you can get into one machine and travel to another one even without the internet.
Right. It's also always important to look for ways to reduce any potential opportunities for attacks, which is why you should be proactively monitoring for any holes and security vulnerabilities so that you can manage the risks.
That's right, because news travels fast when a security vulnerability is identified. That means, essentially, there's a weakness in your security defense system, and attackers, they like to exploit that because it's easy. So make sure to install those fixes, the security updates. For example, Microsoft releases a lot of their security updates on Patch Tuesday. But as your security, your technology grows, not just security, but technology overall, the potential for your vulnerabilities grows. And so doing things like vulnerability scans or assessments will help you identify anything in the environment that could be a potential vulnerability, giving you the opportunity to kind of assess the risk that it presents to you, giving you the capability to report on those, especially if you have you're compliance bound. Reporting is important. And then, of course, the plan to remediate those potential vulnerabilities. Now, we also recommend evolving to vulnerability management, like Michaela said, proactive vulnerability assessments, because by continuously looking for holes in your cybersecurity systems, you can have insight to improve your security posture and reduce the risk of an attack. So it's this ongoing, regular process of finding, scanning, addressing, and managing those security vulnerabilities. So that's, like I said, it's often required as part of compliance laws, but it's also a key part of your IT security strategy. You can't protect what you don't know about.
That's true. And as we mentioned earlier, with business or technology being used more and more in your normal business operations and productivity tools like Microsoft 365, the amount of data that we have being created and being stored is growing faster than ever. And with that increase in data, there's also a growing need for more oversight and control to make sure that you're keeping your data private and secure to your organization.
Yes, and there are many best practices for protecting data from malicious threats and against unauthorized access. Uh, it's important to know where, who, there's lots of important things, but it's important to know what data you have and how sensitive or important it is, know who has access to that data, and then know where the data lives and where it goes as it's being shared. So, controlling who has access to the data with security measures like principle of least privilege only grant people access to the data that they need in order to perform the functions of their job, and limit the use of admin accounts. Multi-factor authentication, which is the idea of going beyond just a username and password to allow access into your systems. And then conditional access, which is evolving your authentication or how you grant access into your systems by not just having people say who they are and prove who they are, but also making sure that the devices that they're using are logging in from the right places, um, or that their devices aren't using an outdated operating system like we mentioned before with Windows 7. Then there's this other kind of practice of setting up guide rails within tools like Microsoft 365 to ensure safe, productive collaboration. You can use policies to restrict capabilities for certain users in tools like Teams to make sure that you prevent kind of this content sprawl. The information doesn't start going into other places where you don't know where it goes, which leads to unchecked security management. There's also ways to automate enforcement so that you can simplify ongoing security management in those tools. Some important things to think about as you're maturing your cybersecurity practice.
For sure. And as we always like to talk about, we can take all these steps to help keep our data secure and keep it private to organization, but there is also a factor in data protection that you have to think about. You never know when an attack is going to happen, and you have to be prepared to be able to recover your data if something were to attack or happen to your organization.
This is my favorite thing
We
to talk
always
about.
mention it.
Backup, backup, backup. You want to make sure now that you know where your data is and how sensitive and how critical it is to your operations, like we talked about earlier, you want to make sure it's backed up. And that means making sure you have backups for Microsoft 365 and all of your cloud solutions. But going a step further, which is testing your backups to make sure that the data is backed up properly, and that the data that you need is backed up so that when you need to rely on it in the event of an emergency or an urgent situation, you have confidence to know that it'll work for you.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and that you got a lot of good information out of it. If you have any last minute questions, feel free to send them in the chat now and we will answer them for you. You can also contact either Marissa or myself at our emails listed here on the screen. We are always looking for suggestions or topic ideas that you want to hear about, so feel free to send us any feedback. And if you didn't get enough of us or IT concepts today, you can check out our latest episode of Marissa Explains It All on our blog. And stay tuned for registration details coming out soon for our next webinar. And with that, thank you all again for hanging out with us today, and we will see you next time.